So our next speaker actually made a long trip for us. He's actually based out of San Francisco. And he was very nice to actually offer to come up and speak to us about the next generation data center. Let me introduce Bill Miller, the CIO of NetApp, and let's give him a little pop.
Thanks, appreciate it. Okay, can everybody hear me? All right, it's good to be back home. Come back home. It's been a while now, but it's great, always great to come back to UCLA. It's always great to come back and talk about new and exciting things, and I'm going to provoke you with some thoughts this morning about, yes, it's a boring topic, it's IT infrastructure. Not so boring, not so boring, and I hope to convince you of that this is some of the fastest changing technology that's enabling all of the experiences that you're going through daily with access to information, tools, and data. We just heard a great discussion about analytics, and I'll touch on some of that in this, but this is the power behind that. Now, it's a provocative title, the next generation data center. It may not be what you think. Well, I don't know what you think, right? But it may not be what you think based on what I'm going to share with you, and I'd be interested to hear what you say at break or your thoughts as to whether this is where you thought I was going with this. But, you know, I have the pleasure, this is the first time in my career where I've been a chief information officer at an IT company selling to IT customers in Silicon Valley. That's a kind of a unique confluence of events. It's sort of a frenetic place to do business. It's a lot of fun. It's a lot of excitement. The rate of change is just incredible. I've been in the CIO chair for about 20 years in multiple Fortune 500 high-tech companies. I'm going to bring this to you not from a company that's a purveyor of IT, but from a practitioner, a CIO, who has to live with these challenges and help solve problems and build these out. I think a lot of you will relate to what I'm talking about, and some of you, maybe this is going to be new material. So let's plunge in. Let me set the stage first and say there's a whole bunch of challenges going on in the IT world today. And most of these, if you're a practitioner, will relate to these. This desire to get faster, to get more agile, quicker, to manage the pace of change in industry. Mobility everywhere. We all want to be wireless and handheld and have access to the same experiences. You know, cloud. I'm going to talk a lot about cloud here. If you don't want to hear about cloud, you should get up and leave now, because I'm going to talk a lot about cloud computing and how that's evolving and how that's the standard going forward. We've heard about analytics. You know, we've still got loads of arcane legacy business processes, right? It just takes time to change the ones that we want to change, and we want to retain some. But legacy business processes slow us down, lack of standards. Technology's changing, and the gift of legacy, the stuff that's been around. That, by the way, not legacy at the university. Legacy at the university is a good thing, right? We want legacy at the I'm talking legacy technology, aging technology. Okay? Transformation. My gosh, how many of you are in IT practitioners or follow IT or participate in IT, right? It just keeps on rolling, right? It just keeps on changing dynamically. You know, you go back. I remember the 90s, the dot-com boom and all the promise and all the new industries that spun up, right? I remember this incredible movement of labor offshore. It's cheaper, faster. We're going to, by the way, we sent all this labor to Hyderabad and Chennai and Bangalore, and what are we trying to do now? We're trying to get rid of it through automation. We're trying to get rid of all those jobs completely, right? So the technology keeps on changing. You know, starting really earlier this decade, I think the cloud became very real and viable and essential. So we're living through that transition where the cloud is very important. And then certainly we're going into this era of true digital transformation. We talk about it here. I think this is one of the best forums in the country. We really talk a lot and we dig down into digital transformation. It's real, it's here, and we're seeing it enabled by a series of things: hybrid cloud, you know, analytics, automation, which is really at the CIO forum level that I participate in, the hot topic today is how do I automate routine business processes and then augment that with machine learning so that I can continue that evolutionary cycle. And guess what? The disruptors are winning. How many people took an Uber this week? How many people got it? Look at the hands for an Uber this week, okay? You think that's not disruptive? That is incredibly disruptive, right? Disruptors win. It's new business models. It's faster to market. It's the way we want to consume the world, right? And we're powering that through technology. Bunch of business drivers. I'm not going to go through these. We just heard a great presentation on analytics. You know, the goals today: deliver real-time insight to respond faster. That's so critical in where we're going. Engaging customers with a personalized experience. I want to consume this the way I want to consume it. To my younger colleagues out here, you have an expectation of how you're going to consume this technology, and you're demanding that as we go forward as presenters of that technology. And then it's all about continuing to improve business processes and being more efficient than the competitors are doing, okay? If you're in the IT world, a practitioner of IT, you've got to be beholden to this approach. You've got to keep the business running, the KBR spend ever shrinking. You've got to get more efficient, and you've got to move those dollars to innovation and strategy for your business, or you're going to be done. Your successor is going to come in and do it. Don't wait for somebody to come to you and tell you to take cost out. I have an organization that we meet every Friday morning from 8 a.m. to 9 a.m., and what we do is we go back and we look at spreadsheets and we determine how many dollars that week we've harvested through efficiency or elimination of redundancy and where it's going the next week. We literally do that every single week to keep repositioning ourselves to bring the most value to the business. And if you're not thinking along those lines, like I said, your successor will. Okay? It's that simple. And IT is evolving to be more like the core business. You know, we're really driving change in digital. Again, it's imperative that CIOs and IT leaders think digital and move the business away from build and run to being a broker of technology wherever that sits in the cloud, right? You can't run this stuff as a cost center anymore. It's got to be run as a business, and your solution times have to be quicker. So let's talk about, you know, where all this stuff emanates from what we think of as traditional data centers. You know, traditional data centers are what we relate frequently being on-prem data centers are somewhat arcane today, right? They're not service delivery focused. They're based on technologies that we've purchased and built and installed over time. They're generally pretty complex, limited scalability and agility, and they are costly to operate because things get stuck in a generation of tools and technologies that become less efficient each year and harder to manage, right? That's the reality of legacy data centers. Now, most of us have legacy data centers, and I would argue many of you in the room either have or operate within the midst of mainframe computing that still exists in a lot of large traditional institutions, and that's not going away. It's purpose-built. It's not going away anytime soon, but it certainly isn't the solution for the future either, right? And it's something we're dealing with rather than harvesting and benefiting from materially. You know, purpose-built data centers of the past do possess certain flaws. You don't have burstable capability. You got to go buy, build, install, and operate. It's not on-demand, real-time, burstable. It's hard to roll out great analytics solutions in that kind of inflexible environment, right? There's the lack of these marketplace services, okay? Who do you think of? When I say marketplace services in IT, who do you think of? It's Amazon, perfect. AWS. It's not Amazon, right? It's Amazon Web Services. It's not the Amazon data center construct. It's the services notion that I go shopping there for all kinds of utilities. I don't go shopping for software, hardware. I go shopping for capabilities. That's what I'm trying to buy when I go to a place like AWS. And by the way, Azure, amazing stuff going on. I think Satya, with his platform approach at Microsoft, has made an incredible turnaround in that business. And I think what Azure is doing is really incredible, and we're starting to see that real competitive capability between Azure and Microsoft and others that I'll talk about. Consumption models, what do I mean? Consumption model is sort of a phrase that we throw around in our industry. It really says I want to pay by the drink, I want to pay on an expense line, I don't want to capitalize heavy equipment and underutilize that for a period of time, right? I want to set up a large infrastructure and buy it as I go on an expense line and not capitalize. Consumption models, very important going forward. We don't want to be big capital investing organizations, right? We want to be expense line organizations going forward. And all the data isn't readily accessible. You could go through this list, and I'm not going to talk through it. It's an interesting slide in a sense. We could drill down and spend an hour just talking about the complexity of data centers. But lots of different vendors. lots of different configurations, kind of hard to pull. Even in a well-run large data center where you've got standardization across vendors, you still sort of have applications pigeonholed into certain pieces of that infrastructure that make it hard to change and dynamically manage. And that's the reality many of us are in. Most of us that are even progressive today as large corporations have a certain amount of on-prem investment that we're working through the capitalization on before we move to the next-gen data center. So let me talk a little bit about next-gen. Here's some interesting statistics. This was a study that was done this year in 2017. And if you read through this, what this really says is the recipients, and there were a lot of recipients, this was 6,000 IT organizations that were queried in this study. There's a realization that we're committed to the cloud, okay? Real data shows this today. And you can read this different ways. You know, multiple private clouds means I have no longer data center, but I have private cloud connectivity between my data centers, and they act like a cloud. But what you're seeing is companies now are saying, we're going to go, the vast majority of companies, to a hybrid cloud model, meaning I'm going to have on-prem and true external cloud supplier support blended as my data center solution in the future. And in many cases, multiple public clouds. And I think anybody that's in the Fortune 1000 space is going to tell you they're going to be in that 20% of multiple public cloud capabilities to run their enterprise. So let me build this out. But by the way, I don't know. I think the 1% with no plans are people working in finance. I'm not sure. I'm not sure who got queried on that, but I'm thinking that's the group. Single private, those people are not going to be employed that much longer, most likely, by their firms. But that's my opinion, by the way. So another study here is pretty interesting, shows the opinion of IT practitioners today versus in 2 years where they think these platforms are going. So the folks today that are saying, I'm still largely non-cloud, are realizing that in 2 years we're going to be cloud subscribers. That's our data center solution in the future. Okay? So let me talk about this. You know, some of you in the audience with more experience, how about that, Jim? Does that work? More experience? You know, we remember the on-prem, totally owned, you know, nailed-up data center in our business world, and we operate in that world. And then the big advance was to go to co-located facilities. Wow, there are companies out there that will keep the technology current. You know, they'll have better footprints, better AC, lower power consumption, multiple threaded network connections from a power distribution, and they can keep up with all the infrastructure, and I'll just drop racks in more efficiently as I go forward, and I'll pay for what I use, okay? And that's the colo model. We felt, wow, got that solved. Glad I've moved forward, okay? Then what happened? All of our software companies got awareness and said, we got to put platforms in the cloud. We need sticky solutions that once the customer is in our data center with their data, they're going to stick with us forever. And you saw SAP move, you saw Oracle move. We've got new companies such as one of our sponsors here, thank you, Okta is a great example of this. ServiceNow, Workday, Salesforce, SAP's got Hybris. We could keep going and going. These are large, substantial cloud platforms that are really have today the largest and fastest growing market share in their application space, right? But if that's not complicated enough, we've got what I call the hyperscalers, the hyper-converged utilities. The four that we generally think of are here, right? We talked about AWS and Azure, but you've got IBM Bluemix in there, you've got Google Cloud Services, and you potentially even have, as we go east, some newcomers that are making big investments. Some of these are nation-state investments, right, to become cloud centers in different parts of the world. So this notion that I sell specific stuff here versus I'm selling you a whole service catalog, a marketplace of richness that you can come in and design in that space. So what we see realistically going forward, most of us, is a combination of these things leading to a hybrid cloud reality for at least the next decade or so. So people who come in here and will oversell cloud to you, you know, it's all going to the cloud. Come visit my mainframe. Okay, and we'll talk about that. It's going to be a hybrid cloud reality for some time. And of course, owning your data and accessing your data is one of the harder aspects of this. This is the picture I like to think of when I think through this. I think of our traditional data center model, on-prem data centers. In my opinion, this is the data center of the future, right? This is the data center of the future. It's the fact that not only will you have data centers, you'll have a private cloud. Those data centers will have to be seamless, moving data across geographies. Even if you're not in the public cloud, you got to do analytics, you got to collect data, you got to converge data and pull it together where you can take action and do something with that. So you'll have private clouds, you'll have colos, some will be on-prem, some will be off-prem. These are sort of virtualized within themselves. And your SaaS providers, I mean, I don't know anybody rolling out human capital management solutions on-prem. My God, if you are, do not admit to it in this room. Right? Because nobody's doing that, nobody's doing it with CRM, and you're seeing more and more solutions moving to the cloud every year. It's where startup companies are making money, it's where IP is going, investment capital is going into new IP creation. And you're going to have more and more partners. And guess what? If we blew this up, the number of partners offering cloud solutions to your business is staggering. And it's going to continue to be that way because you're going to go to the Workday cloud and have certain data and processes there, and you're going to go to the Salesforce cloud and have workflow and processes there, and you're going to go to ServiceNow because you're going to go out and get all of these great ITIL compliant best practices that emerge. So you're going to live within this world, but you're going to have a lot of your solutions, your intellectual property solutions on-prem. And then guess what? You may not even realize how many of your people are going out to hyperscalers with a credit card and subscribing to true cloud-based services today. I'll tell you what the great awareness, some of my friends have said, we went back to procurement and pulled all of the AWS subscriptions from different departments outside my buying center and put them all on one page, and it was staggering the amount of money we're spending with AWS. And the CIO doesn't even know because procurement's out doing this independently, right? And these solutions, now that's, in one way, that's good, and in another way, it's terrifying, right? Because do you really have governance over your data and your platforms when all of that is happening independently, right? And by the way, tell you today, if you have a large on-prem private cloud solution, as many of the Fortune 500 companies do, that is still a far more cost-effective solution than going out here. Because these people are charging you a markup and a healthy markup. There's a reason Mr. Bezos is one of the most wealthy men on the planet. Okay, there's money being made in all of this stuff, right? And so I'm not saying, by the way, I'm not saying that's a bad thing. I'm just saying that is the reality of the situation. So you want to understand that and go in eyes wide open. Community clouds are simply saying, gosh, I love these guys at CenturyLink. They run wonderful data centers. They've got great analytics platforms and tools. They've made a few acquisitions there. I want to take advantage of those analytics tools in their cloud. So it is a multi-cloud world. Your data center solution is going to look different than anybody else's data center solution. This is your data center of the future, whether you like it or not. This is where it's going. So get used to operating that way. Again, we talked about the big hyperscalers. I got a lot of data here. I'm not going to go through the content on these slides, but trust me, these people are growing. The expansion is enormous. The wealth that's being created in the economy around these folks. If anybody here owns a high-tech index stock of any form, I guarantee you own a lot of shares of these folks, right? Because this is where wealth is being created in the economy today through the growth of these kinds of companies. Some guiding principles of next-gen data centers. Again, I'll let you read the words on the left. There's a lot of cute words there, but basically it's about this software-defined data center. You have to know where your information is, you have to know where your applications are, and you're going to have to manage the data around the edges. That's going to be very challenging because that data that we want to harvest and we want to leverage, the data's the new oil, we read about it, right? But the problem is the oil's all over the place, right? And you've got to deal with that to make the kind of inferences that we just heard about that are going to be differentiating for your enterprise to go forward. And all this stuff needs to be API accessible so it can go to the device of choice. So those of you who want an active career in IT, you got all the opportunity you could possibly hope for going forward. No lack of challenges, okay? I thought this was an interesting observation. This actually came from IDC, which is a pretty well-known organization on IT data. And I drew a red box around this. This is interesting. These two. We're concerned about lock-in, and so we keep workloads and or data in multiple clouds. We don't want to be beholden to one cloud supplier, and we're always looking for the most economical cloud supplier. I don't want to get locked in on I want to have options to move my workloads around with whoever can do that most efficiently. Okay? Very interesting observations from the practitioners, right? So we're getting a marketplace across the marketplaces. That's what's happening today. And I want to bring this back to data. I want to bring it back to data because I do believe this concept, this data is the new oil. I mean, it's the advantage we have. I mean, that to me is a big piece of what it means to go forward with this digital transformation. It's about the data and how we utilize that data advantageously and competitively. Think of it as data center versus data. Okay, it's not the thing, the place, the door, the secure environment you go through that's the data center. It's the data wherever it sits in your virtual data center that's most important. Data has mass. What do I mean by data has mass? It's growing and it's... Thank you, yes. No. A plus, friction, it's hard to move, to try, particularly to take large quantities, and instantaneously, because you don't necessarily know what data you need and when to do the kind of analytics, or where you're going to put it, right? So we talk about data lakes. A lake means all that water's coming from somewhere else, or all that data's coming from somewhere else. So how do you get it there? You know, we've got switches and networks and latency and all the things that go with that. So it really is something that has to be designed well to get that data available to you to assess when you need to do it. And you don't want to, the redundant data source, you don't want to copy it everywhere, right? The last thing you want to do is replicate the data all over I mean, I'm fine with that as a NetApp employee. That would be great. But as a CIO, I can't honestly stand here and tell you that's necessarily the best idea, is to replicate everything. It's growing. You know, we talk about the Internet of Things, which is just gobbling up and creating tremendous amounts of data. We talked this morning about smart manufacturing and the data that's available on the health and well-being of a manufacturing process, all kinds of sensors, acoustic sensors, visual sensors, measurements. All that data has to be processed real time so it can help control and adjust a machine. That's big data, and that's really Internet of Things when you start looking at it. In this case, the things are the manufacturing devices working on the factory floor to be smart and efficient and highly productive, okay? It's all about having the data where you need it. I thought this was an interesting play on words. There's no longer, when we talk about data centers, there's no longer a center of data. And that's something you ought to take away from the presentation. That's the reality. There is no longer a center of data. So how does this play out, okay? Couple thoughts. You know, and I want to connect this to the first slide where I talked about, as CIOs, we're all driven to get the fast IT. We want to be more nimble. We want to be more flexible in what we can deliver. Because, you know, your businesses, your entities, whether it's an institution of higher learning, whether it's a corporation, the rate of change is just phenomenal. The business wants to make a hard right turn, 30 degrees at full power, instantaneously, okay? And they also want to buy other businesses and start blending new business models together. IT can't be dragging it back, right? So we're trying to figure out how we get fast IT. Hybrid cloud really does empower fast IT, and that's really important. You get quality-based applications, you get rapid procurement on demand. I'm going to talk a little bit about that configuration in just a minute. But it's scalable, expandable. These things are really true. It's not necessarily the lowest cost, okay? But it may be the most available in real time to help you be nimble and agile as a business, right? And a lot of the legwork is done. What I mean by this, think about the cloud suppliers we mentioned. If you go out to a Salesforce or a Workday or an SAP or an Oracle in the cloud, those business processes are being codified in software once with tremendous reuse across many, many different customers. That's not to say you can't configure it slightly different for your business, but it's not the old ERP era where you start from scratch. Okay? You don't start from scratch. You have a pre-configured, best-in-class solution, and you start going with that, which makes you a little more agile than starting by kneading the dough rather than buying a piece of bread. Okay? I think DevOps plays a big role in all of this. If you're going to try to get to something akin to a DevOps model where you're application development, your infrastructure is tied together for multiple releases per day versus a few releases per quarter, right? And Don and I remember, in the world, gosh, if you had a release per quarter, rock and roll, right? I got it figured out, right? I'm on a time schedule. Trust me, Uber's not doing multiple releases per quarter. They're doing releases per day. How many times, you got iPhones? Everybody out here got an iPhone or an Android? Okay, you get a little red circle or something equivalent that pops up when a new app is ready to download. Okay, how many of those do you get a week? Okay, that's DevOps. That's pushing these applications readily and daily and frequently to the customers to stay ahead of the competition. Okay, so these kinds of data center models empower and enable a DevOps because you get burstable resources available as you need those resources and as you're ready to consume those resources, and you can choose the configuration rather quickly. I'm not saying that's easy, an easy end state to get to, but it is the end state that the world's going to because it's the most powerful end state. And one thing IT always does is it rises above any kind of politics or any other view of the world. It gets to the most efficient end state. It's a great world to operate in from that perspective. We can all have opinions, but at the end of the day, what's going to result is the most efficient solutions for the paying customer and the consumer community. Okay? So you get a lot of different choices. I put the Phoenix project up here. Interesting story if you've never read it, if you like IT and you want to understand a little bit about DevOps and how real companies go from, oh my gosh, to a DevOps model. It's a great story if you haven't had a chance to read it. And and DevOps I think really does, by the way, I'm not suggesting if you have a 15-year-old on-prem ERP platform, you're going to turn that into a DevOps solution tomorrow. I'm not suggesting that, but I am suggesting as you adopt new platforms and technologies and move forward, you're going to need to be a little more nimble and a little more resourceful in order to compete. All right, let me kick over. In this slide, what I want you to take away from this is, as you evolve with your organization, you're going to need what I call cloud decision framework. Okay, and that's some fancy words that says understand what solutions you're trying to build and where the cloud fits in your larger constructs for this. So I'll jump right down here and say, from an execution standpoint, you got systems of innovation, differentiation, system of record. Classic system of record, your HR system. Now for most of us, I'll bring my voice down because I don't want the HR people to hear. Okay? Because the HR people think the HR systems are the most important in the enterprise. I like to think of the systems that help us deliver product to the customer as being the most important, but we debate that, okay? So I would argue an HR system is a system of record. I need it to run my business. It's not going to make me generally more or less competitive in my marketplace. It may hold me back, but it isn't going to differentiate me from my competitors, and it's not going to drive the next generation of innovation, right? I'm pretty sure that Uber didn't get to where they are because of their HR tools and platforms. I'm pretty sure. I could be wrong, right? I could be wrong, but I'm pretty sure. So if, what's that? Clearly they didn't, right? By the way, every time I talk to an Uber driver, I get a different opinion about the company and what's going on, so it's kind of interesting. Ask them a little bit about the company next time you get in the car. It's interesting. All right, so what we're thinking about here in types of these systems is you just need some mapping that says, when do I go to the cloud? When do I stay on-prem? Yeah. Yeah. Yes. Yes. Jim's asking the question about cost models and how do you manage that when you make decisions and manage across the space. Well, it says one thing. First of all, you have to know what you're spending the day in your on-prem structures and the total cost of ownership of all those licenses, of having technologists on staff that can do this stuff versus going to the cloud where you're consuming it at different levels. And it may be in small increments that you don't have as much visibility into. So you're going to have to come up with financial modeling in your IT center that looks at this over a period of time and says what's most effective. But also, it's a speed issue. Okay, it's not just a cost issue, it's a speed and resiliency issue, and you may have to balance that off to some degree. Yeah. Well, there's that. There's always that the question about, being forced to do this. I would suggest, as an IT leader, that you're leaning into this kind of technology. And instead of asking the question, how am I going to get support for it, you say, how do I best leverage this for the next generation of solutions? By the way, when I say the cloud isn't necessarily the most cost effective, I think in some instances it is. If you're a small company, trying to stand up your own infrastructure or build a data center is far more cost effective than going to the cloud. If you're a Chevron or a Morgan Stanley or a Qualcomm down in San Diego, where you've got really phenomenal technologists in your organization and you can get scale, you can run a little less expensively than you can go to the cloud with. But it doesn't mean you want to do everything on-prem, because the cloud gives you flexibility for small elements of technology that you want to bring in and burst out on. So part of it is that, are you going to run it full time or are you going to burst out for it? Yeah. 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 Yes. It's true, because the traditional models, you can go out to any of these consultancies and pull a TCO model or have your own TCO model. And when you're only going to use it partially, so let me give you an analogy. I'm going to get to your question. Let me give you an analogy. I got an ERP system, and what I really need is a third of a person to manage VAT taxes in that system for me, because I'm not changing my VAT tax module, value-added tax module that often. Do I want to keep a person on staff that just knows a lot about VAT tax? Probably not. I probably want to bring in a partner for that, 500-600 hours a year that person is going to work that. I think there's an analogy there to how you partake of cloud service and cloud capabilities, but you have to expand your thinking to that level. Yes, sir. Right. Thank you. Thank you. That's a great point. It's the skills mix too. By the way, thank you for bringing that up, because I wasn't thinking along those lines for this presentation, but to some degree where I'm constrained is on headcount. How many heads do we have in the company? What are they doing? Where do I go get the talent, right? So in some cases, you want to keep that core, I'll call it FTE, full-time equivalent count, to the rocket scientists. Thank you, Jim. I had to throw that in there, okay, for you guys in Pasadena. But you want to keep that to your core capability. I'm really telling you, I want to hire some more data scientists in my organization. I don't want to hire storage administrators, right? Yeah. Okay. Yes. Yes. Right. Yes. It's a great point. No. I think that's a great point, because you can't have so much diversity in that mix of tools that you can't manage. You can't orchestrate it at that level. I think that's a great point. It's a very good point. Yeah.
Accelerated digital transformation versus the change in the worker. There's a transactional worker that's going to be automated out eventually.
Yeah, that's right.
We talked about that in the last session. What are your thoughts on how fast humans are changing to keep up with this trend?
I think it's really a challenge in the job space. Let me give an example that's close to us, which is storage engineers. And some storage engineers are really, really talented people. And I love them because they're some of our biggest customers. But at the same time, I have to be honest with them and say, those of you who go back to my era in, for example, the semiconductor electronics era, we used to be riddled with test engineers all over the West Coast, folks that would write test algorithms and test programs for equipment. They're gone. They are gone. They're like buffalo, bison. They're just gone, right? You have about 6 of them on the West Coast who are working in a lab that they can hand that stuff off to the Far East. okay? And that's what's going to happen with storage engineers, because all this stuff is being automated, the logic's going into software and how to configure, and we're not going to need that kind of skill set. We're going to need a lot more data scientists, right? But we're not going to need that. So you have to think about how to take your precious head count and move it into the technologies. And hopefully our friends at UCLA are going to be training all these young people with the right talent. Please don't ask me questions about that, because I got to get through this. I'm just going to say there's a lot of headwinds to cloud. I'm not saying get the cloud is easy. There's some things. Cloud management platforms are just evolving. They're complex. I get all that, right? But we are making great strides. This is a really busy chart, but I want you to take one or two things away from this chart. Of all the stuff I'm showing you that has incredible value, it's what's behind this slide that your organizations are going to want to figure out how to build over time. You're going to have to come up with provisioning and service development models across your hybrid cloud data centers to be able to spin services up, not in hours, but in minutes, okay? And they're going to have the right Linux operating system, and they're going to have the right cloud containers, they're going to have the right tools, they're going to have adequate storage and CPU processing with the right amount of memory, and don't expect a human being to have to intercede to do that. Those have to be cloud management platform automation procedures that starts with a configuration management database of your assets and is able to go through a provisioning process, all electronically. A user goes into a ServiceNow panel and clicks what they need. An engineer, let's say, clicks what they need, and this stuff is automated into a production environment automatically. Tools like Clicker that were just purchased, systems from Cisco, are building out that capability where this becomes a point-and-click model. And by the way, what we do at NetApp, my folks do this as well as I think anybody in the land. We can build this stuff out and build an entire environment out in the public cloud, or we can build it in the private cloud using our partner tools. Red Hat's a big partner of ours. We use their tools, and we build these environments up real time, and then we turn around, we run our simulations, we run our designs, and then we shut the platform down and we're done with it. And that happens in a couple of hours. You've got to get to a model that allows you to do that to operate in the future. So when we build a platform for our engineers, we may build 1,000 instances of an operating environment in a couple of hours, run a whole series of tests across all kind of permutations on that platform, and then we shut it down, okay? I don't stand all that stuff up and keep it in a data center and wait for the next engineering group to come up for 3 weeks while it's sitting there idle, eating up power and air conditioning. This stuff's got to be real-time, repurposable. It's no different than when you flew in on the aircraft, you watched the aircraft come into the gate, all the passengers got out, right? The aircraft came in from Seattle, you all get on and it turns around and goes back to Seattle. Right? That thing's not sitting in the hangar for 2 days, right? You got to get max utilization out of these platforms and tools. And the key is it's got to be fast because it's got to be on demand for the user community. Yes, sir. Important, yeah. Mm-hmm. Yes. Yeah. I think you're seeing companies like Cisco, and you're seeing companies like Andy Bechtolsheim's company over here, Arista. 90% of the content in those switches is software now. And you're getting software-defined networking moving at such a pace that that's largely moving to kind of bare metal structure with operating systems and software that are going to help make that more limber over time, right? It's not perfect today. I don't know if it'll ever be perfect because we'll keep placing more demands on it. But I think this is the world of software-defined networking. It's the world of software-defined storage. And it's going to continue to evolve. And you'll get, hence the self-healing is in the resiliency of the software layer. Okay, so I think you'll continue to see that. It's still a struggle today. And a lot of these software-defined platforms are far from perfect. Right? They really are. So let me keep moving. So how are we doing? Okay, so this is my unabashed kind of sales piece in the whole thing here, but I'm not really trying to sell you the stuff. What I'm trying to tell you structurally, so we still have a lot of on-prem data centers, and we're going to have on-prem data centers. This is a real depiction of a set of racks, okay, with a lot of storage in them. And for those of you who are buying all-flash storage today, which is more expensive, this is what you get versus the racks in the data center today, okay? More expensive, lightning fast, and allows you to reduce your data center footprint. So we thought that flash migration was going to take several years. It's happened within 1 year. All the customers that come back to us and say, your stuff's too expensive, we don't have any money. I'm not just talking about you, Jim. But, our customers that come back and tell us that stuff then say, but we want to buy your more expensive flash stuff because of this. You know, if you can take 9-to-1 reduction on a data center floor, power reductions, you know, all the goodness you get, plus you get higher performance, particularly when you're doing things like analytics and you want to grab data fast, the load times for that data is very important. So don't underestimate the value of modernizing data center technology in this whole process. Remember, I said it's a hybrid cloud. You're going to have on-prem cloud. You need to continue to feed that and make that more efficient as you also join the power of a hybrid cloud. All of our stuff is ultimately going to flash, and the next thing is storage class memory, which brings in a whole nother level of performance into storage, which is, I mean, for those of you who thinks Moore's Law is dead or dying, it's got a ways to go. We got a ways to go on Moore's Law. I think, you know, it's going to get me into retirement at least, I'm pretty sure of that. Okay. Another piece of example is hyper-converged infrastructure. Have you all heard HCI? Do you know what HCI stands for? Is this getting too techie and in the weeds? I don't know. Hyper-converged infrastructure, let me dumb it down for you, kind of at a concept, is to bring in a processing unit. Think of it as an R unit, kind of that would go in a rack in a data center. It's bringing the processors, the CPU capability, the storage, and the networking all into one integrated design in a box. So what you get today, and these are available today on the market, they're evolving in terms of their features, the feature richness, but it's a data center in a box. It is truly a data center. It's all flash storage. It's high-performance CPUs with networking capabilities so that you can put a data center in a box. This was originally envisioned to go to the big hyperscalers. It says, you just plug in the racks. You get a $15, that was a smaller number, but I said, you know, everybody's saying 15 now, so I got to go to minimum wage stuff here. So, you know, $15 an hour, somebody shoves the stuff into the racks, and it kind of self-sets up based on the software stack, right? We thought this was going to take over. It's not going there as fast. Where it's going are to edge solutions. So I use an example, an oil rig, a ship. I need high capacity. Why? Because it's big data. I'm going to collect from a drilling rig enormous amounts of data, and I don't want that data being in Houston. I want the data on the rig so that the sensors down at the drill head are feeding back real time to make decisions about the health of that rig and what I want to do, and do I have to adjust, stabilize, change drill speed, whatever. That's kind of the analytics and tools that I want to. But I basically, for relatively low cost, can put a data center out on that platform now and handle the big data needs and the analytic needs and the monitoring needs. This is a new world because guess what? My argument is that box that sits out there on the ship or that box that sits out there on the drilling rig is part of your next-gen data center. It's just an extensive, because you're going to need to also pull that data back to do analytics and report out and determine how all your rigs and assemblies are doing and the efficiency of your drill heads and are they wearing out, blah, blah, blah. You get the picture, right? So to me, this is a very exciting future. Pay attention to this. This really is a Lego blocks model for computing that until the last couple of years, the technology has not supported this, and it's really just amazing where we're going. It sort of fractures your whole view of what a data center is, okay? Last couple of things I want to go through here, some sort of, you're going to need a plan for this whole hybrid cloud evolution, and your points and what you bring in and what you have to develop are going to be at a pace that you're going to have to produce. So don't think you're just going to sort of talk to all your suppliers and get there. You know, you're going to have to actually make a thoughtful plan on how you're going to develop the skills and evolve to this kind of framework. Okay? By the way, the stuff I throw out here with the machine learning and bots, again, it's the automation pieces that you're going to have to get to be competitive and low cost in your world. We do a lot of this. We've tried a lot of different things. We're customer one at NetApp. My teams build and operate this stuff. We go back and disappoint the engineers by telling them all the great stuff they did doesn't really work as well as they thought it was going to work. And then they say, are you sure? But they don't say it that nicely. Okay? So we test drive a lot of this stuff. It's really great. It's also very complicated to put all these new solutions together out in a beta mode. But it's a great world, and the technology is really moving in phenomenal rates. Let me talk to you about skills. So, where are we going? It's a whole new business. I mean, it's a whole new business, right? You need architects. So, to the young people in the room, now I'm speaking to you. Not so much Moshe on this one, but the rest of you, okay? But Moshe's one of the youngest people intellectually in the room, so I guess, right, that does apply to you. Here's what I'm telling the young people in the room who may still be enrolled in a class or a learning experience. My CIO professional opinion is top 3 career opportunities if you want to go into computer science or technology. Data science, boom. You're not going to go hungry. You're going to have a fascinating career. Cybersecurity, phenomenal. No end in sight to the need for great cyber engineers. And the third I add to my list, cloud architects. Be a cloud architect. Don't listen to your parents. Listen to me. Your parents will be happy because you'll have a job and you're going to make great money and have a lot of fun in your career. So that's my advice to you. You can take it, take it for what you paid for it. But there's a lot of new skills that are going to be needed, and they're not necessarily storage engineers and rack and stack them data center people long term. Now, you're going to have to get there over time, but the skills are really changing, and I think we'll be sitting here in future years and over the next decade discussing how we're doing here at the university and building these kind of skills and talent pools out and setting up relationships. Yeah. I think you can't do data science without probability and statistics as a piece of that curriculum. Yeah, sure. Yeah. So here's how I look at data. It's interesting what you said. We should have an iced tea and talk about this sometime because I think it's great. I think this whole notion of data science is a confluence of a knowledge about where data sits and how you acquire data and an understanding of how to consume data with statistics, probability, and statistical methods, okay? And to some degree, knowing how to liaise with business process experts to understand their specific problem domain. You have to be fairly intellectual and a bit of a generalist to say, I'm going to sit down with sales operations this week and supply chain next week and help shape those challenges around data. No, I'm sitting in front of the board of directors as a target most of the time is what I do as a CIA.
To see what purpose they're trying to achieve. I mean,
yes.
one word,
Yes.
Purpose,
Yes.
why?
Right.
This system to achieve the purpose.
That's so well said.
Not occupying the level of, I would say, prominence within the organization that you should.
Yeah, it's a long-standing debate for CIOs and what role they play in the organization. I will say this. I think that in general, I'll speak certainly for my role, I think we have a lot of influence today in a corporate environment. And I think that influence has been driven by this whole digital transformation. And I'll tell you what, the other thing is I am familiar with some of these board organizations in the Bay Area. Boards of directors are understaffed critically in a couple areas today. They're understaffed for cybersecurity knowledge. They don't understand the implications of cyber, and they're all scared to death because of their fiduciary responsibilities, okay? They don't understand cloud at all. And if you look at the complexion of most board members, it's hard to believe, but they got more gray hair than I have, most of them, okay? So they're not from the cloud generation. They don't have that experience. And a lot of them don't know how to leverage analytics and digital transformation to find another way to monetize the values that they can offer in their marketplaces. So boards are even starting to evolve to seek board members with those kind of experiences that'll make them more competitive. Not every board member should be a CFO, right? Because you got blinders on, and if you're on the audit committee, maybe, but you better have somebody on the audit committee who knows cybersecurity. That's my view, okay? So can I do my last slide? I know you're shushing me here, but and rightfully so. But the last slide, I say, I'll start with I'm not supposed to end with a negative, like you can't, but I'm going to do this for all the CIOs out there. Some things you cannot afford to do. And this, by the way, is not just CIOs, but those folks that report in and have administrative responsibility. You can't ignore this movement to the hybrid cloud. It's real and it's imposing, and you've got to be able to leverage it for advantage. And you can't underestimate the complexity of managing your data. You're not going to be able to deliver these fascinating competitive solutions if you don't understand how to move your data around, manage your data, replicate your data, and provide some governance, GDPR type of principles, governance around your data as well. You got to get into the architecture piece. You've got to have thoughtful architects who design this stuff before you get run over by the business, and then you're into it accidentally. And you can't provide all the data and services out of your own data centers. Those days are gone, and if you try to hang on to it, you're going to lost. You're going to be lost. You just can't afford to wait to act on this. Get out in front of it. Michael and I have talked about this over the years. He's a big proponent of new technology. You got to get into this and say, I'm not going to be a victim. I'm going to be a thought leader in this space, and you'll do much better and represent your firm much better. Okay? Thank you.